Alright, so for chapter 5, just dive right in. So describe why this is important, classification. It helps students determine the similarities and difference in really anything. Um, if they are able to identify why something doesn't belong with other things, then they are able to classify. And the activity that I really liked is having the students group into what like t-shirt they're wearing or what color shoes they're wearing. I think that's a really um, good way to get the students involved in the activity, and it might help them understand a little bit more if they're the example. For patterns, it helps enhance their development in mathematic concepts. Um, It also helps them to identify like what order something is appearing in, and what might come next. Um, and the example that I chose was using the unifix cubes. Um, I think if they're able to construct a pattern themselves and explain it to you and why it makes sense to them, then either they're going to discover that the pattern doesn't really work or it does work, and they have the concept of patterns. The difference between rote counting and rational counting is rote is being able to recite the number name sequence in proper order, often incorrectly count the number of items in a set. Um, this is kind of not where you want students to be. You want them to be more into rational. It's more of the goal. They're able to recite the number sequence, make a correspondence between what they're counting and being able to say the number, um, and they can rationalize that the last number they say represents the total number of objects in a set. So like you give them um, the number 34, and they're able to um, be able to tell you what each number represents, and how it works with everything else. Describe how students progress in their counting abilities. So counting on is your basic 5, 6, 7, 8. They're able to do that. Going up and counting back is the opposite of that. And then skip counting is counting by fives or tens, 20s. Um, what are various modes of representing numbers? Why is it important to transfer? So you have concrete models, which are more like physical models. You're able to touch them. So like buttons, tiles, base 10 blocks. Um, Pictorial is more or less like drawings that either the students make or they look at. And then the symbolic representation is having students describe what process they took to get to the answer. So it's um, more of like an oral sense, and how they got to that. Um, it's important that they transfer between each method, so that way it gives them a variety of ways to solve the problem. Um, if they're given more opportunities or ways to solve it, the chances of them being successful are going to be higher. A number sense is counting objects in a set, counting a given number of objects, comparing sets or numerals, and modeling simple joining and separating situations with sets of objects. I have a picture there of 10 frames, and I said they can be used to help students count, take away, add or subtract, if they're able to see what they're doing, it might make a little more sense to them. So for how do you teach estimation, it really just comes down to you using the word about, and like about how many soda cans are there, or um, just teaching students to more or less guesstimate. The book example said to cover up a group of like toy cars or whatever, and then have or show it to the students and then cover it back up and have them say about how many cars they saw. So into chapter 6, what are the stages of place value development? Stage 1 is associate two-digit numerals with the quantity they represent. Stage 2 is identify positional names but do not necessarily know what each digit represents. So like for 54, they know that the 4 is the ones and then the 5 is the tens. Stage 3, identify face value of digits in a numeral. So they're able to know that the 3 means tens and the 4 means ones. Stage 4 is transitional stage, during which students construct true understanding of place value. So they really get the units of 10. They know that the 5 is really 50, and the 4 is really 4 ones. And then stage 5 is the culmination of all of those. The student really gets it if they're at stage 5. They understand the structure of our numeration system. So a two-digit numeral represents a partitioning of whole quantity into tens and ones, that number represented in the sum of its parts. So really all that's just saying is they know what each number represents. If it's a two-digit number, they get the concept of how many tens there are and how many ones there are, and they'd be able to describe it to you. Why are grouping activities important for students? It allows the students to experiment that are meaningful to them. So if you have students with this, I'm pretty sure the book was saying like popsicle sticks. If you have the students group those popsicle sticks into based off their color, and then have them describe it to you, or explain like why they did it, chances are they're either going to realize that their grouping really doesn't make sense, or it does, and they get that concept. So some materials to use for place value. For proportional, it's pre-bundled sticks, so I think like popsicle sticks, base 10 blocks, meter, decimeter, and centimeter sticks. Non-proportional is a little bit harder because it's like position, color, and size. Proportional is going to be easier for students to see, touch, as to where non-proportional is they really just have to look at it and explain like what the place value is of that. So how can you assess students' knowledge of place value? Using manipulatives. So you could have students put like a base 10 blocks based on like what the number is. So the manipulative is the base 10 blocks, and you'd have them, like if you had the number 34, you'd have them make 3 10 blocks and then 4 just cubes. And then understanding tens and ones, so that's really just having them describe to you or showing you the process of how many there are. So like my example is show me 24 cubes. just them showing it to you. Regrouping, remove place value, remove in place over here, so that's just taking something out and then putting into something else that makes sense. What can you use a hundreds chart for? Helping students count up or down, place value or patterns. You can really use them for anything. If you have like a big one on your board or small ones at the student's desk, they could use it as like a reference chart. And it really shows them every number up to 100, so they're going to be able to see if they're counting up to 5 correctly or counting by 5s correctly. And then what's the difference between rounding and estimating? Rounding has more to do with the value of a digit following the decimal point. Above 5, round to the nearest 10. Below 5, round to the nearest 100, or round to the nearest 0. So that's more or less like what the ending number is, and either going up or down, either to the 10s or the 1s. Estimating is more like at a glance. So it's like making prediction, just like the example I used with the cars, or the having the teacher show them for just a split second, and then having the students make a prediction about how much there or how many there are. It's really just the same thing, and then them just being able to think about critically about what they saw, and then making a educated guess on that. Yeah, that's my notes.